Hey, Mitch Gray, how you doing again today? So, welcome back to the Question Guy podcast, and we are going through how to hire and keep great people. And again, for our viewing audience, here's the book,
It's a
and
great book, by the way. Great book.
it is a great book. And you have been such a pleasure to talk to on these conversations, and people are watching. At least the numbers say they're watching, and so that's exciting for me. Hopefully it's exciting for you. And I know on LinkedIn we recently had somebody just kind of say, I've listened to the podcast, and I actually think she listened to the podcast and not the YouTube video, because there are actually those numbers on my podcast on Anchor and Spotify are going up as well. And so
Yeah,
it's
and she said it's her new favorite podcast. And then she even was able to give us her, she was even able to give us her favorite episode. And I'm pretty sure if I saw right, they may be in the recruiting field. And so that means a lot. The message that we're giving to people makes sense and is helping. So yeah,
she actually is in the recruiting field.
very
And
cool.
so
Good job, man. Congratulations for you. Nice job growing your message, man. Keep up the
I,
great work.
I appreciate that. But we're going through the book, and we're going through the book intentionally because I do want people to realize that this isn't just some out of space, off the wall theory or paradigm. This is stuff that actually works, and it works. Again, from our last episode, you did it, and you're teaching others to do it, and you see the success. And so, with that as our momentum, chapter 4 says this. The title of chapter 4 is "The Real Reason People Work," and that just looking at that could say, well, obviously there's a reason why people work, but
Yeah.
you go a little bit beyond just the monetary value of having to earn that dollar. And so at the end of each chapter, you list a bunch of questions, and really I only want to focus on, not just because of time, but for value here, the first 3 questions. And remember, this is now Mitch Gray's perception of his own knowledge. Okay. So this is
Yep.
just
Yep.
as if you were the client. How are you looking at this? But you're the author of the book. So the first question reads like this: before reading this book, and so I have to say, before writing this book, what was your perception about why people work?
Mm.
So that's kind of a twist on some ideas.
Yeah. It's interesting. I was actually going through that chapter specifically earlier today, this morning. Working on some new material and needed to pull some really great pieces of data that, if I'm not mistaken, I think I opened that chapter up with some pretty hard data and research.
You do.
Yeah. There's and it's pretty. I won't give away all the goodies, so people can go check out the book. By the way, I want to say the ebook of How to Hire and Keep Great People will be releasing very soon, so stay up to date on that. But yeah, that's an interesting question. What is my perception of why people go to work? And when I look personally, both at I always reflect back on my first real leadership position. And for anyone listening to the show, you've heard the story. For anyone following my content, you've heard the story. If you read the book, you've heard the story. But when I was in my early 20s, I had the honor of being promoted really quickly with a great company, still a great company, and I was 21, 22 years old, and I'm just in a way kind of thrown into the fire. And so I often reflect back on that, because not knowing it, like many moments in life, not knowing it at the time, that was a real game-changing 5-year window for me. And in many aspects, I actually didn't realize how game-changing it was for 10, 15, potentially some lessons aren't even learned yet with what happened then. And I really learned and experienced firsthand during that season that my assumption was because I was also in that place as well. My assumption was people showed up to a job to make money.
That's a
I
good
was in a
assumption.
place.
Yeah.
Yeah, it is a good assumption. It's not wrong. I'm going to add to it, but it's not wrong. I was in a place in my life that I had a young family at that time, two kids. We had, gosh, what a 6 month old and a 3 year old. Man, we weren't making any money. We were, God, man, we were so poor, man. I mean, like a lot of people, I have so many stories I could tell about that time of life, and so it's just survival of the fittest, and especially when you're that young with a family, it's just, you're just trying to make it. And so I was showing up to every day just to make money, right? Like, but at the same time, and for anyone that's heard me, speak before or have read any of my content, I also, since I was 10 years old, all I wanted to be was a pastor, a minister, a priest. It's all I wanted to do. It's what I went to school for. It's what I did for a couple of years. And so even in those moments that I knew I was showing up for money, and even in the moments, this is the late 90s, so we still handed out paper checks. Even in the moments that I would hand out my checks to my employees, I still knew there was something deeper. Even though I was ignorant of how to connect the dots, I still knew there was something deeper, that it wasn't just about money. And so what's happened over the last 25 years is what I've learned is this: people take a job for money, but they don't stay for money. And the data shows that. The research over the past 5 decades shows us that exact conclusion. And guess what? The last 2.5, 3 years during the pandemic has amplified that principle.
Wow.
What led to the Great Resignation was not people just wanting to quit a job. What led to the Great Resignation was people not finding fulfillment in their everyday work. And so they were willing to sacrifice money for happiness. They were willing to exchange stress for poverty. Because what they were learning is they're better off not having money and getting to spend time with their families. They're better off not having money and trying to figure out how to hustle on the side so that they can maneuver their schedule around to hit little Sarah's choir concert. Because what the pandemic did is overnight, it pulled the rug out from the traditionalism of an archaic, massively large system that says, I pay you, Keith, and you show up. No ifs, ands, or buts. And what the pandemic did is it put a reflection up to people in the mirror, and they said, screw that. This job is miserable. My boss is, and what's crazy is the data proves that out. The data was prophetic.
Wow.
50 years ago, the data told us the same thing. People take a job for money, they will not stay for money. So then it's like, okay, so let's step back further. Let's take the 50,000 foot view. So why do they stay? And that's the real question people need to ask themselves. What is your perception of why people take a job? But the real magic is found in, but what is your perception of why they stay? Because as a leader, the perception of why they stay is going to dictate and facilitate your type of leadership. If you firmly believe people stay because of money, you will lose every time. You'll be frustrated, stressed, you'll lose your highest performers, you'll have a turnstile of a team and employee, it'll be miserable. If you shift that to a perspective of people stay because of value, because of fulfillment, because of connection and joy, because of emotional intelligence and the response to that in culture, you cannot be a slave driver and empower people to high emotional intelligence. It doesn't work.
So question number 2, and I usually give it like my rebuttal on that or something like that, but I'm not going to, because question number 2 is interesting. Since the book, and the question reads like this: how is the book, How to Hire and Keep Great People, reshaping your perspective on why people work? And Mitch, as a reminder, there's 20 chapters in this book, and this is only chapter 4. So you're asking people who are intentionally reading and have read through one, two, three, now four, you're asking them to reflect on what they've read. And if
Four
it's changed
chapters
them,
in.
yeah, four chapters, and you're not even getting into the meat. This we're still kind of in America. This is kind of the appetizer, the salad. This is kind of getting us wet. Just wow, you got some really cool ideas. I want to know more. So how are you able to one ask the question? Maybe you don't need to answer that, but in Mitch's perspective.
Yeah, that's what I call the art of audacity, right?
Well,
It's like who's this fool 4 chapters in thinking he's changing my life already? Welcome to the Mitch Gray world.
Yeah, welcome to the Mitch Gray world. And I always say, every time I have a conversation with you, there's something I could pull out.
Yeah,
But let me ask you, can I rephrase the question then? Since you
sure.
wrote the book and now it's
Mhm.
been out for a year,
Yeah.
how has the book reshaped Mitch Gray's perception of how to hire people? Is that a better way of approaching the book? Or
Yeah,
different?
the crazy thing is, I consider writing books an art form. Most people do, I would say. Some people don't. Some people consider it's very scientific, methodical. I consider it a creative art form, and the most challenging thing about presenting your art to the world
Mhm.
is no one may care. Like, no one may care. And so I just kind of always had this idea about me that if I can't present my art form in my most authentic, audacious way with courage, then what am I doing? If I present my art form in a way that holds back, then what am I doing? I take that approach in my content creation, my speaking. I just want to be bold. I want to be bold as a facilitator of thought, as someone who ignites the spark in someone's brain, chemically, spiritually, emotionally, that goes, oh wow, hold on a second. And I say that because the way the book probably changed that for me is through affirmation. I've had people tell me I don't agree with parts of the book. That's good. We should never agree with each other 100%. I told you last time I don't agree with parts of the book anymore, and
But
that's an
yeah,
evolution.
yeah, absolutely. Because you
That's an
wrote it at a
evolution.
point in time and you've
Yeah,
grown since then. You can't.
and so I would say the way it's changed me in any form or fashion is probably given me even more courage to teach the approach I teach. And what that means is I fully believe you should pay people fairly. In fact, I'm not a financial advisor by any stretch of the imagination. But I would argue that I think people should be paid over what the market says they should. That's my opinion, because I think there's value there. But more than that, I believe that you should develop and hire and recruit people based on their humanity as a person and hire the person, not the skill set. And I believe that even more today than I did 3 or 4 years ago when I first started really developing the book.
Mhm.
And so it's actually made me more passionate. It's actually made me more bold and courageous in challenging the status quo of hiring and recruiting. I believe hiring and recruiting strategies have become very lazy. And I want to challenge the laziness of people that have never been taught a better way. I want to challenge the ignorance of people. I'm not speaking that to speak down. It's just when you have lack of knowledge, that is the definition of ignorance.
Right.
I want to actually educate those people to give them better support. And so if it's changed me in any way, it would be from the standpoint of it's made me even more courageous and audacious and bold because even today on LinkedIn, someone made the comment to me about the Great Resignation.
Really?
And I think the Great Resignation is a myth. I think it's a mindset personally. And I feel like I have enough knowledge and experience and have studied it enough to prove that out through data, through research, and through human development. And if we keep feeding the idea of the Great Resignation, we're going to keep getting the return on the investment of the Great Resignation. If we feed the idea of the golden age of hiring, that there's more opportunity now to hire great performers than ever before because they're unsettled, then we're going to reap the reward of the golden age of hiring. And I believe thought pattern matters that much. Yeah.
Well, I don't know what to say. That was just going. Then that was good.
That's just chapter 4.
That's just chapter 4.
4.
But so audacious is probably a good word because it is literally just chapter 4. You're introducing ideas to people,
Yes.
and then you're asking them, well, how do you think differently now? Well, let me ask you this question then, because now we're going to go. I don't want to go into 4 and 5 because they kind of like build upon each other, but 3 then flips this. It says, okay, I get it. This is about the book. This is about your thinking. This is what you thought. This may be a change. This may not be a change. But then we get practical. And this is where you go down. You get very practical. Question number 3 reads, what actions can you take to give your team members a feeling of greater purpose each day? Which then just reflects upon what you just said, is that, and I wrote about that because a lot of your content I repurpose and rephrase on the Question Guide newsletter on LinkedIn. And so I looked at that as, if this is now an opportunity, and we can look at it as an opportunity, both for hiring, for growth, not just in terms of your team and your employees, but for leaders and their leadership skill sets. What actions can you take to make this a more opportunity?
Yeah, and you're right. The previous question is really, and I think we talked about this a couple of chapters ago, about how I always want to plant seeds for future harvest. And oftentimes those questions, even though they're going to try and respond in that moment, what's going to happen is they're going to have a conscious recall in a few chapters from now where it does develop. And so that's another scenario there. Also,
and that's purposeful. I mean, that's strategic.
Yes, 100% strategic.
Of your book. Yeah.
And this question is the same. This question serves 2 purposes. Number 1, it's an easy question to answer right now. But later in the book, we start talking about the rule of reflection as a leader, interpersonal growth, the path to great leadership, fear, the great teacher. How do we use fear as a great teacher?
And you do talk about that. Yeah, you talk about that significantly. Yeah.
Yes, and really what's happening in this question is we're saying, okay, what can you do today to show these people appreciation and value? But what happens is we turn that back on the reader to go, but really where you begin is here inside of you. But we don't bring that full circle until chapters 16, 17, 18, I don't remember, somewhere. It's toward the end. And so really it's a full circle approach to say, hey, we planted this seed earlier about what you can do today. Things like saying thank you, things like showing appreciation, etc. But then we come back later in the book and basically go, hey, remember this question in chapter 4? We're going to ask it again, but this time you're just looking at the reflection in the mirror.
Right.
Because until you begin with the reflection, you'll never be able to reciprocate it outside of yourself. And so to me, that's a really great approach to go, I'm going to ask it now so it's tangible, but I'm also planting a seed for a future harvest that people will be able to consider.
And that's a good way of approaching, how you want people to think about themselves. And if they're going to take the role and your word burden the responsibility of leadership, because it is a burden. If you are given or have the role of a leader, and that's a person, and I like to use the term leader rather than leadership, because you want to look at the person and what the person is doing and how they're thinking and what they're saying, then that's really important. Continue to plant the seeds for growth. Mitch Gray, as always, thank you for joining me in another podcast episode of the Question Guy podcast. And of course,
chapter 4.
And we've completed chapter 4. So with that, anybody who's watching or listening on our podcast, thank you so much. And we'll see you next time. Take care.